Good afternoon. Welcome to a sunny afternoon in Retford. I'm basically introducing this video now. I'll be continuing with it tomorrow, but I'm going to draw your attention to the Stag here, okay? This Stag has come in. It's been in before. I did a gearbox change on it. It was leaking oil quite profusely, and rather than wait to have the original rebuilt, the owner actually purchased a new gearbox. And it's been fab ever since, but now the carbs have started leaking. Now, in the interest of originality, particularly, he wants me to have a go at rebuilding them rather than change to a Weber. I advised a Weber. It is quite an expensive conversion. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the carbs. I've had a quick look just as it came in, and I've identified that it's leaking fuel quite profusely out of at least one of them. The delivery driver has advised the customer, he knows about classic cars, but he did say these are SU carbs and they're actually Zenith Strombergs, obviously. So I don't know whether he knows actually as much as he was saying, but either way, it's an easy mistake to make, to be fair to him. He was a nice guy. But yeah, so she's leaking fuel. He said, oh, there's some pipes that are cracked and broken and things like that. So I'm thinking it could be a leaking fuel pipe and not a big fix. But anyway, I'm going to sort of show you not only the symptoms, but how I approach this. So removing the carburetors in the best way, and then sort of stripping them down and checking and testing things. It could be something insignificant like a stuck float. It could be a needle valve, in which case I'll put Grosch valves in. It could just be a gasket. He thought it was maybe a gasket. I don't think it is, but we'll have a look at that anyway. So what I'll do is I'll get the torch and I'll try and let you sort of listen to how I identified these faults in the first place. So for those of you that don't know, and I'm assuming most of you will if you're watching this, a Triumph Stag has twin Zenith Stromberg Carbs. They're bolted to a pent roof manifold extension that bolts to the top of the intake manifold. It's a reasonably strange way of doing things, but that's how they did it, and it works perfectly well. This is fed through 5/16 or 8mm pipe, some of it nylon, some of it rubber hose, but most of it's usually a nylon pipe. If I ever replace them, I use conifer like I do for brake pipes, or copper, because it's not as important on fuel pipes. They don't tend to break and snap. That's all fed by, originally, an SU fuel pump, which is the type with the breaker points in, so it goes click, 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 until it makes enough pressure. So therefore, if the floats are open, you'll hear a click, 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 and then as it fills those up and the floats stop, it goes click, click, click. It doesn't maintain a lot of pressure, but it does maintain quite a lot of flow. MGBs use the same idea. Morris Thousands use the same idea. Jaguars, Rovers, they all use the same type of pump. They get quite a bad press, those pumps, and I ran two on my Capri when I first put a Rover V8 in that my dad had saved when he had his own garage 20 years previous to that, and we gave him a clean up, re-gapped the, retensioned the points and everything in it, and it never missed a beat. The only time it ever went bad was when I hooked up 75 horsepower nitrous oxide, and of course it doesn't make enough pressure to feed a nitrous system. So as soon as that nitrous solenoid opened, it lost all its pressure and it just went pfft and backfired through the nitrous, but it didn't do any harm. So anywho, so that pump lives in the boot. Here, it's sort of, if I show you, it's sort of adjacent to the filler down here. So it's behind, you see the red trim there here, that's where the pump is. Now you should be able to hear that. Obviously I've got the radio off because I'm terrified of copyright with YouTube. But it lives in there. So yeah, so it lives in there. You can see if I just stand the torch like that. Sorry, the lighting's above here, so the boot lid shields it. It lives in here, behind here. The tank obviously lives underneath the boot floor here, and it's about there. Okay, so that means that if there's an issue, you will hear that pump running. So the first thing is, if we know we think there's a leak and we want to identify it, just flick the ignition on. Oh, he says famous last words, just bear with me. The best way is to flick the ignition on till the ignition lights comes on. Now, if you listen, and I'll get my microphone now, you can hear the pump running. I'm hoping you can hear that. It's running fast. Now that should stop with an occasional click once every sort of 30 seconds, once it's up to pressure. But as you should be able to hear from that, it hasn't stopped. So if I click my microphone back on, that means we've got a leak somewhere. Now, obviously the customer's identified as leaking through the carbs, so it's then to have a look. Now, the pipes that he's referred to as being cracked are these here, okay? And that pipe there is an overflow from the float chamber. So if that is leaking there, it means the ball valves are definitely gone, the float valves. Now this side appears dry, okay? So if I go to the other side now, sorry, bear with me, grab the torch again. It may or may not switch on, it's about on its last legs. If you can see on this side, down there, you probably can't see it very well, but underneath the carburetor there, on the breather hose, it's wet. I can see that clearly. It's not leaking out. This is the overflow at this side, okay? So I can't see it leaking anywhere else but there. So if you look underneath the carburetor, I'm hoping you can see that there. It's definitely leaking under there. Where exactly, I don't know. But it looks to be leaking either out the drain at the bottom, out of the gasket, or out of the overflow. Basically, it does overflow through there first, through the gasket first. So what I'm going to have to do is pull the carburetors off, which we were sort of aware of in the first place. So what I'll do is I'll talk you through that process. I'll turn the ignition off first. It wouldn't surprise me when I get into there if the top of the engine isn't just full of fuel, because that's what they tend to do once it's got like this, and then it's smoking out the back, and it just genuinely looks like the engine's destroyed, but it isn't. If you continue to drive it, he rang me up about this as soon as it happened, and I said, don't drive it, turn it off, leave it in the garage until we can sort it out. And then he's had it brought across here for me by a recovery driver. If you continue to drive it, you will get bar wash and your engine will destroy itself. And people think, well, yeah, but how long will that take? Well, I'll give you an idea, probably about 50 miles. It happens ludicrously quickly. It's scary. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set you up on the old tripod of truth, and I will just show you how I start and strip these things down. Okie doke. Right, so what I'm going to do, set you up on the tripod, is remove these 3 bolts here, bolts actually. These are 5/16 UNC, and these hold these elbows to here. Now, because of the shape of the cars, because of the shape like this, like that, you can then lift that off on block pretty much. But the first thing I need to do, really, I'm going to just whip that choke clip off. There's a little clip here for the choke, and what I'm going to do is, those are a bit weird to find if you need them. I have got some somewhere, so I'm going to put that on the workmate so I don't lose it. And then what I'm going to do is just whip these 3 bolts out at each side. I aren't going to worry about the order. They are different lengths, but they only go in one way, pretty much. The top one is super short. I'm just going to use my rattle gun. Now, I wouldn't tighten them with this, obviously. I do tend to keep stuff in order even so, though. Just purely because I'm desperately anal like that. So, there's one there. Just carefully. Like that. This clip here isn't factory, I don't think. I don't think they had those originally, but it doesn't matter, it's not doing any harm. Just leave that on the cable, don't need to disturb it at all. Bob round the other side. Same process. I use the extension bar purely to space me away from everything, so I'm not rubbing or damaging anything when I do it. Take those screws and bolts out. Now you'll notice the choke cable here goes through this pipe here, and I need to lift that off. So I'm going to just whip that off there. So it will come past, I think. there are other pipes connected that you kind of have to pull off as you go along. That one goes round. No, that one again. That one goes. I need to take that off as well. Let's move it to there. And that should just pop off there, lovely. Once the air filter box is off, it does give you an awful lot more room under there. And I'm just going to disconnect the cold air feed. So that all comes off on block. And that makes life an awful lot easier if you do it like that. You can strip it down to its component parts if you really feel the need. Just going to bob that in the customer's boot. It's not getting damaged or scratched. Now you can see what you're sort of dealing with, okay? So the next things we need to do now, these are off. These are just the extension pipes. As you can see, that's the pipe there that I said about the overflow. It comes under the carb here. I'll just grab you all of a sudden. It comes out of the carb here. Okay, underneath the carburetor, down the side of the rocker cover, and then goes into this, which is just a pipe that just soaks it onto the floor, basically. So if it does leak, it shields it away, basically, from the exhaust manifolds and the heat. This pipe goes to the thermo unit on the bottom of the air filter. This one here. This is the warm air feed for the winter setting on there. Please be careful not to damage this, because that's new stuff I got for this customer, and it fits really weird. So you're better to retain your old stuff if you can. Next thing I'm going to do, disconnect the fuel pipe. Okay, I'll probably disconnect that at the fuel filter under there. And then I'm going to disconnect the kick-down linkage, which is a 7/16 nut here, quarter UNF, and this pin here, which is just a split pin in the end. That will then allow me to disconnect the throttle cable here, which goes round to a connection on this side. You can see the screw head here. It's just a slotted screw. And that will come away. And then the choke mechanisms. Well, this choke mechanism, this choke mechanism is here. Quarter nut there. And then the same on the other side, which again has another one of these clips. These clips come off like that. So you just push that part, put your finger on here so it doesn't fly into the God only knows where. Flick it up like that. They are really springy steel, and they just slot through there like that. That's where the cable is held. Then it crimps back over there. It clips back over there like that. Okay? Right, so I shall do that now, and then we'll come back to where we're at. So I've managed to put together an array of tools here to disconnect the throttle and choke linkages. So I'll do that now. Right, so I've done the cables there. Obviously, I've speeded that up a little bit for you. If you look here, I've taken the pin out of there. You'll notice I put things back loosely where they came from, apart from the washer that fell down in the valley. You can just see there, but I'll get to that once the carbs are off with the magnet on a stick. The pin out of there is on here with my tools and bits and bobs, purely because I couldn't get the split pin to go back through it, and the washer fell off that as well. However, that's no biggie. I'll be putting new pins in anyway. I'll just zoom you back out a touch so you can see easier. This is obviously, these have fallen off anyway because the petrol's made them go hard. They're probably not originally fuel pipe. So the kick down is disconnected. This is the choke linkage here. You can see that spins. I just grabbed that with a pair of long nose pliers, and that's a 1/4 on there. The other side one, you probably saw me use a socket on that because somebody's removed that at some time, put a 5/16 screw in there or an 8mm, one way or the other, but it definitely works, so that's fine. The fuel pipe is disconnected. I'll just draw your attention to the fuel pipe, the fuel filters. I'll probably be ordering a new one of those. Yeah, can you see how it's compressed it there at the end? Not ideal, I must say. Yeah, don't like that at all. So that'll be getting a new, I'll probably just cut that section off. Cut that section off here because that's the 1/4 section, the 1/4 pipe. These are actually 1/4 on these, but the fuel feed pipe to the filter back is 5/16, which is really weird. I've blocked this end of the pipe, just stop it dripping everywhere. This will drip a little bit, but it's only a spot or two coming out of there. It's higher than the fuel tank, so as long as you don't let it keep running, it won't siphon out the tank. Again, disconnected, so fuel pipe's disconnected. This choke mechanism is disconnected here, and as you can see, that's the 5/16 or 8mm bolt that's through there. Now, the next stage, zooming you in, is to remove this. Okay, so that there, I'm just getting the torch so you can see better. That is the vacuum advance for the distributor. Now, normally that little brass fitting there would be 7/16 headed on it. So you need a 7/16 on it. I don't know what thread it is, but I know the head is 7/16. However, this one's had something a little smaller put in there. It looks like a 10mm to me. Once that is out, I can then remove the 9/16 nut here. Oops, excuse me. Need more hands. The 9/16 nut that you can see adjacent to it, that's actually straight up. It's because I'm holding the camera at a funny angle. That's absolutely straight up, and that retains these carbs and that cast aluminium, part on top. Okay. Now, if that brass section on yours is rounded off and won't come out, it is a taper thread. I think it's 1/4 MPT, but I could be totally wrong. So don't scathe me if I'm wrong on that. Then the way forward is to very carefully remove the top of the dashpot on this carburetor, obviously, and the diaphragm and piston, and put a socket across onto there. That does work if you've got a long reach socket. It's not ideal because getting a spanner in there is awkward. Now that looks like a 10mm to me, so that's a lot easier. So what I'll do is I'll whip that off. Obviously the vacuum advance pipe, the vacuum advance pipe just pushes on. So that should come straight off. This pipe here we don't need to disturb. This one, that one just goes to the bottom of the air intake box, the air filter box. It's for it controls the diaphragm for the cold start. So I'll whip that off. Right, so that nut should be a 9/16 3/8 UNF, and it isn't. So I'm going to have to find a larger socket for that. I'll be back in a second. So it looks like it's 5/16. They're about 16mm, so we'll go with that. This one seems to fit on. That was a little bit of a worry. Right, so that's those parts undone, excuse me. So the nut is off here. Oops, here. Obviously the brass fitting is out. I need to remove the breather pipes. Let me just zoom you back out, sorry about that. Just zoom you back out. So this breather pipe needs to come off. You can see now the carbs are loose. These are only a push fit, so they just fit on like that. This one I've actually released at this side, I think. Oh no, I haven't, sorry. Tell a lie. That one comes out from under that mechanism there. Just pull out the vacuum advance pipe. Just tuck it out of the way for now. Everything's quite specific on a Stag in this respect because everything gets very busy under here. So things like these pipes need to be the right shape and stuff. I'll just tuck it across under there. And now these should, everything being equal, lift away thus. Famous last thusers. Right, now then, the first point to notice, okay, when your carbs start to leak, the fuel will come out the overflows, but it will also go into the engine. Can you see it in there? That is petrol, okay? Some of it, a tiny bit of it, will be a tiny bit of a mist of oil, okay, which is probably discolouring the fuel, but that is mostly fuel. So when I had the pump running earlier, you can see there's fuel run down onto that hose there. That's come out the bottom of the carb, okay? And then it's gone directly into the engine through the carburetors. And there's a load of muck and filth in there as well that I need to pull out. Now, that is what ruins your engine. Okay, so put you back on the old gimbal, but that's what destroys your engine if you carry on running it. Now, luckily, this chap used common sense, rang me. I told him what was wrong and not to use the car, and he hasn't. As I say, it got transported over. If he tried to drive this from where he lives to me, chances are it could have killed his engine and resulted in a very, 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 very expensive engine rebuild. I think it's very expensive. You might not, but either way. So basically, that's what's wrong. Now, I'm just going to set you down again and get the carbs off. So, having zoomed you out again, these are the carbs off the car. Oops, just want to sort of fuel pipe it in the car. So there they are. This here, hopefully you can see that, is where the fuel's coming from there. That's the jet cover underneath the carb. It creates a bit of a sump on the bottom of the carb. Now, the gaskets actually look okay. This one's leaking here. You can see that one's leaking. As soon as you look in there, you can see where it's leaking. And well, that's the fuel. The fuel that you can hear or see leaking out right now is simply the fuel that's leaking out of the float balls, because they would still be full, obviously. And when you turn them over, it obviously leaks out the overflow. This gasket doesn't look as bad. All right, that one looks fairly clean. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these over to the bench. I'm going to set the bench up so it's clean. And I'm just going to pull the bottoms off these carbs and have a quick look inside. And then if there is any parts needed, I can get those ordered tomorrow morning first thing for it before I put them all back together again. Other than that, it does appear just to be leaking out of here. Okay. There's no fresh fuel anywhere else that I can see. I'll leave the top off the manifold. I'll give it a dry out with a rag. Obviously, I'll be very careful to dispose of that rag so it's not a fire risk. And then I'll let that sit overnight as it is. I won't cover it. I'll just let it sit as is and let that evaporate away. Okie dokie. So you can see here, obviously, there's fuel leaking out the carb. So I'm hoping you can see this. I've got it set up on the little tripod. And I've gone as far as to put some lighting in. Well, I've stuck my torch to the bench anyway. The fuel leaking out is just the petrol coming out of the overflows. Don't worry about that too much. It's not going to hurt anything. What I need to do first, you'll notice my bench is clear and tidy. There is odds and sods on it, but not a lot. And I've put down some lining paper. Now, newspapers is just as good as this. In fact, actually, I prefer putting newspapers down because you can scatter them around a bit. But this is all I've got. So I've put some lining paper down just to make sure that any dust, detritus, muck and stuff isn't going to end up in the carbs, basically, because these need to be absolutely spotlessly clean. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the screws here from the float balls, of which there are 6 on each carburetor. They're a slotted screw, and as with everything, excuse me, start diametrically in the middle. I will say, people who do a lot of this, such as YouTube, I'm going to do one carb at a time also, so I can keep these in order. And if I forget which order the screws go back in, I've got the other one to check. Yeah, it must be near impossible with the light shining in your eyes and stuff. I don't know how they do that. I know a lot of people just do videos that are just sort of, I don't know, just stuff really. They're not doing detailed stuff like this, but I guess if the light was above me, it'd be fine. I keep meaning to put a light above this bench, but obviously I can see pretty well. Luckily they've loosened up on this one. So far, so good. Again, laying them out in order on the bench, just on the paper there, so it's clean. I've got some gaskets, I think, in stock. I carry stuff like that anyway for stags, but I do need to check they are the correct ones, because obviously they might have been from a previous job for something else. I think they're all Stag ones, quite honestly, because it's Stags that predominantly have this problem. So that should just come off there now nice and easily. Just pull like that. Now, you should be able to see there. Keep saying you should be able to see, I'm hoping you can see, that the gasket is intact. It's leaking purely because there's that much fuel gone through it. It's leaking. We know the jet holder appeared to be leaking. Again, whether that's actually leaking itself or whether it's just leaking because there's so much fuel in there and it's leaking down and making it look like it's leaking, but I'll check that anyway. And if there is I can't remember if there's a seal in there, quite honestly, and if there is, I'll change it. I aren't sure. It's been that long since I've rebuilt a set of these carbs. Oh, there's no O-ring in there, so I'll change that out as well. I don't think the O-ring is leaking, quite honestly. But we'll have a look. There is fuel past it though, so we'll have a look at that as well. Now I'm going to check the valves. Okay, so I'm going to remove my bit of bolt out of my fuel pipe. And I'm going to check just this needle valve on this side. And the way I do that, those gaskets are ruined, by the way. I will have to change those. The way that I do that is just blowing through. So the fuel comes in through this jet here. Okay. Obviously, this is the float mechanism. So when the carbs are the correct way up, they fall down. Thus, as the fuel pulls up, it lifts the float, which presses on the needle valve, which you should be able to see here. Okay, and that stops the flow of fuel. So, he says, mouthful of petrol. So that one seems to be sealing well, actually. Now, that is the one that wasn't showing any leaking on the car. That's obviously the passenger side one. Now, the gasket's obviously leaking and the jet cover is leaking. This is the jet in the centre here. And obviously, I will change the gaskets anyway on both of them. I wouldn't just do one. I mean, you got it off, you wouldn't just do one. So I'll just bob my bolt back in there and I'll remove the other side. Now, like all things, we know that that all came from that side and it all worked. Now, yes, these are the same and yes, they fit both sides. But if it always went on there and it always worked on there, it's going to go back on there. And I'll show you what I do to those once I put them back together. Sorry, I've got sticky fuel on my lips and my lips are sticking together now, which is pretty random. Oops. Yeah, that is really horrible. I'm not actually a fan of this braided hosing. This is fine on this car, but I used to run this on my car. I used to buy it from an auto spares place. And I thought it was the absolute Jim Dandy because I've always liked braided hosing. I thought that always looked the absolute beeswax. And it was great. It was quite expensive, but you had to put hose finishers on like these have got. It's just got a clip on the end. And what I used to do was just put heat shrink over the end. Cut it to length, heat shrink it, and then put the hose clips over the top of that so it didn't ruin the braiding, which was great. And it looked the daddy. And then one day I'm driving along and I can smell fuel really profusely and the hose had rotted inside or split inside. And it was, you'd never seen it because of the braiding over the top. Because it's only a very thin single ply rubber hose in there, it just went and that was that. You didn't get much warning with it. So I've never been a fan of it since. I tend to just use the normal rubber hosing. So yeah, again, leaking from the gasket here a little, I think. Leaking from the jet holder. Those O-rings definitely need changing. Get that one out. As for the float valves, I'll try that one. I'll leave that one down, that won't open. Couldn't open, depends how much pressure I can put through it. Right, putting quite a lot of pressure on that. Excuse me. It is only mouth pressure, I appreciate, but you don't need to put the airline on. The pump only runs at about 1 psi, so I think those valves are actually okay. I will check the float levels, and I will check obviously replace the gaskets and replace the seals on these jet holders, and hopefully that's all it is. What I'm also going to do is adjust these so they are flat and smooth, and then what I'll do is I'll bob them back on the car and try it. If that's a success, that's a success. I'll check the float levels. Both look quite high, but I don't think they're overly high, quite honestly, but I need to check the level that they need to be set at and how they're adjusted, because I can't remember, if I'm really honest, off the top of my head. It's always in the Haynes manual, so if you're not sure, check your Haynes manual, it'll be in there. I'm going to leave them set up like this because that's a tomorrow morning job. I'm going to leave that set up so I know which float bowl and everything goes where. Let's just check these gaskets are correct. I think they are. That goes underneath. Yeah, they're the correct gaskets. So obviously you need the right gaskets and you need them nice and clean and fresh, because you can't be using sealer on there. Very, very fine smear if you can, but luckily I've got a few of those gaskets. This used to be such a regular job at Yorkshire Triumph, it was unbelievable, so I've always kept a set of those in. These little bits you can see coming out are just dirt that's got in the float bowls from things. The other leak, sometimes your needle valves can leak, and what happens is a little tiny bit of dirt or whatever, and it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't mean your tank is ruined or your filters or anything like that, but a tiny bit of dirt can get in that valve. The valve only seats against it's like a ball-shaped seat, so like a ring with a seat, and then as it opens, the fuel forces through. So if a little bit, a tiny smear of dirt gets in there, it's very difficult to get it out. And my dad taught me a trick on that years and years ago, which I don't particularly want to tell anybody, if I'm really honest, but it's there is a way of cleaning them. Now, as I've got them apart and blown through them, that would remove any detritus in there anyway. And I can see that they are sealing. So all I'm going to do is check those levels, clean everything up, put it back together, and hopefully for the customer at least, that's a fix. And for me, because I don't like actually taking them on and off and on and off. You will notice during this process, I haven't changed any of the setup at all. So I haven't removed any of the linkages or anything like that. So everything should be all right. It ran okay before, and the customer hasn't asked me to tune it. So if it ran before, it'll run again. The only thing I do have to check and be careful with is the ends of the choke cables are frayed a little. So I'll show you a little trick for getting those back in without having to buy a new choke cable. Right. Good morning. You're back. Obviously this will be the middle of the video, but yeah, it's absolutely Baltic. It's a double hat weather, and I've got a cup of soup over here. You should be able to see on the bench, assuming I'm not blinding you with the torch, the two float bowls here. Now this one I've gone ahead and cleaned off, but what I'm going to do is just give you a very quick rundown of how I do that. That one's ready to go, just needs a clean. This one is still as it was as I removed it from the car. So you should be able to see the old gasket there. You can see where it's stuck a little around the edges. And I've got to do the same process roughly on the bottom of the carbs. So what I do first, peel off any excess gasket. You'll see I've moved the carburetors because I don't want to end up with a load of muck in the bottom of those. Just whip it off. And then what I do is, I'm not going to go through the whole process because it's time consuming and not particularly interesting. I use a single edge razor blade. Now some people use these blades. I've got one here. Forgot to bring it over. Some people use these Stanley style blades. I can't use them. I don't find them easy enough, but I use a single edge razor blade carefully, obviously handling with care. This is a brand new one. If you use a blunt one, it'll hurt. Keeping it flat, I am in effect shaving the old gasket off there, just a little at a time. You can see that I'm not gouging big sections out of it. If you gouge big sections out of it, it's scrap. Well, technically it is. So what I'm doing is just sliding away at it like that and taking sections out. So what I've done there, as you can see, is remove the bulk of that. Now, you'll have noticed me look at one point, there is a little bit of a divot there. It's not easy to see, actually. I don't know if you can see it there on the edge of the float bowl here, look, that somebody's donked in at some time. It's not like they've dug at it with a blade, it's more like they've bashed at it. I should be able to remedy that. It's not all the way across, luckily. The outside seems okay and flat, but we'll check that in a moment. So what I've done once I've done that, I proceed then to a small, this is just a warding file. Any flat file will do, and very carefully go across a face, thus, and just smooth that across a little to bring any more off. The spray I'm using is brake cleaner, and I'm going to remove the bulk of this gasket now. It is stuck very, very well. Okay, so I just keep soaking a little brake cleaner on there to soften it. Keep giving this a wipe, and then keeping it flat. So I'm giving my finger between the two surfaces. Just go across it to clean the rest of that gasket out like that. I'm not doing it like this. I'm not rocking filing. I'm just keeping it across a flat surface so it keeps it nice and flat and smooth and gets rid of any more detritus out of there. As you can see, that's getting rid of it. You can still see the divot here, but we'll sort that in a moment. I think that'll be fine, actually. If it tends to dry like that and go solid, a bit more. Right, so just worked around it there. I'll have sped it up, obviously, but you can just see that divot here now, hopefully. Let me get you in the camera there. There's a little divot there, look, on the end of my finger, so we'll have a look at that in a moment. So that's, as you can see, that's pretty clean now, actually. There's some little tiny bits left, but I don't want to over damage it and file it too hard. If I was just using a big flat file, I'd just go right across the top, but I don't need to do that. So what I'm going to go to now, I'll move you across here, is I've got a little bit of wet and dry down on the bench. It's 400 grit wet and dry. And the only reason I'm using 400 is it's because it's all I've got. You could probably use anything up to a 240. I wouldn't go more extreme than that. This is just to make sure that that whole base is flat. So what I'm going to do is spray a bit of brake cleaner on it as a lubricant. Okay, and then I'm just going around in little circles on a flat surface. Now, you could use a pane of glass is the best for this, actually. So I could do it on my door over there, but you wouldn't be able to see me doing it. So what I'm going to do is just do it on here to show you. Now, my bench is obviously 1/4 inch thick steel, so it's flat and smooth. So I'm just going to go around in little circles like that. I'm not going back and forth because that still tends to do this, and you end up with a ridge in the middle and that. But I do keep changing directions. I change my hold and move around, so I'm doing it in different ways. So, tap out some of the muck de muck. As you can see there now, if I give that a wipe, just using my thumb, nothing spectacular, it's pretty smooth. Now, that's the divot here. Somebody's chewed out of it at some point. Like I say, it looks like something's been dropped on it. So I may just take a teensy tiny little bit more out of that, but we'll see. I don't want to take too much, obviously, because it affects the operation of the carb. I am only taking microns off, so I just want to make sure that there's at least some part of it is perfectly flat and smooth. The outer edge there feels flat and smooth, but you can still see that the paper hasn't touched it, so I'll come back to that in a second. The other section I'm going to do, whilst you're on camera, is just in here, okay, where the jet cover and the drain there goes in. Just going to give that, this is some very, very fine, forgot the name of it now. What's the name? You know the name. Oh my goodness, forgotten. Wire wool, idiot. Just a little bit of that in there, just to clean it up. Make as good a surface as I can for the O-ring. You tend to find there's a little scratch in there. I can see it. I don't know if you can see it on the camera film there, just in the bottom there. Just try to see the camera myself. There. So I'm just going to try and just sort of ease that out a bit. I'm not trying to remove much material. I just want it smooth. Just want to make it as easy as possible for the O-ring to seal, and then it will seal better. Of course, they change shape a little, but that's just get rid of it there. That's good. I know where the surface is where it actually seals, so that should be okay. It's nice and clean. Again, I'm not trying to remove a lot of material. And then when I've finished, I'll give that a little wire out like that and just give it a clean before I wash them out. And yes, I'm going to wash them out. Okie dokie. So I've removed the O-ring off one of the drains. The other one, I'm going to use one of these. Okay, it's a prod and poke tool. I can't remember what you call them now. They come from wherever. Can't remember who makes them. I think these are Sealy. They come as a little pack of all different shapes. They are sharp, so just be aware that they are sharp, and you don't want them sticking you or always the O-ring. So this is the sealing O-ring that was leaking. I'm just going to pull that off. Now, if you look at that, if you look in there, you should be able to see that that's all cracked. So if I get that close to the camera there, look, you can see it's all cracked around the edges. And I suspect that's the bulk of where it was leaking from. But to get to that, I had to take the float ball off anyway. So good practice and all that. And that one's split. Now, these are immersed in fuel all the time. They're probably 50, 60 years old anyway, but you can see that there. Look, you can see how it's all split and perished. So that's probably the bulk of the leak right there. Just a good clean off now for those. So while I'm soaking, I'm going to soak them. What I'm using here is for soaking and cleaning, I use a brand new mixing cup. Might seem wasteful to keep using new mixing cups, but trust me, these are like 6p each, and I use loads. They just come from a local paint supplier. I buy sort of 20 at a time for, you know, £1.50. But they are absolutely crystal clean, silicone free and all that. So you know that that's clean. What I do is I bob into that. Oops, sorry about that. What I bob into that is a little bit of panel wipe. Some very clean, fresh petrol would work just as well. But I've got panel wipes, so I'm going to use it. This also works to degrease and de-silicone stuff. And I'm going to put a blob of that in there. It evaporates in seconds. So if you watch that patch that I've spilt around it, it'll evaporate literally, well, about a minute probably. And what I'm going to do is, one at a time, just soak them in there, because only one will fit. And then when that's ready, I'll give it a swoosh round with a clean brush and get all the bits of detritus out. Then, if there's any bits that I'm not sure have come out, because obviously I don't want them to go through the carburetor, what I'll do is I'll just give them a blowout with the airline. But I have to be careful with the airline because sometimes there's moisture in the airlines. So I don't want to get moisture in here for obvious reasons. Okay, so, excuse me, I'm back, obviously. You should be able to see that I've cleaned the carbs out now. I've cleaned the gasket surface here. You can't see the other one, but I have. I've cleaned the float bowls and I've blown them out with the airline. And I've cleaned these just with a rag and a little bit of panel wipe. I obviously start polishing the brass bit on that one, but I have on that one, so I knew that was the left one. That's all. Before I go any further, I'm going to check the float bowl height. Okay. Now, according to the manual, it says you measure from the top of here, which would actually be the bottom, but obviously it's the top and it's inverted, to the base of the carburetor there, the flange on the carburetor, and it should be between 16 or to 17 millimeters. So we shall set our vernier caliper up. It's in millipeppers. I'll set it to 16.5. There or thereabouts, 16.6 actually. And what I'm going to do is, hopefully you can see what I'm doing, just check that height there. It's not to within a fraction of a millimetre. Bang on, absolutely bang on that. If that was too high, you would bend this arm here up a little. If it was too low, you bend it down a little to raise it up. But that one is absolutely spot on. Moving the carb across. Weirdly, the needle valves are on the same side. And the throttle neck is in the way. Of course it is. Inevitability. Yeah, that one's spot on as well. Yeah, absolutely bang on those. So they're absolutely fine. No problems there at all. So then it's just on with reassembly, really. So if I just ease the carbs to the side, you'll notice I've put clean paper down. I've cleaned my bench again to make sure everything's spotless. I've put the screws all in there. What I'm going to do first is assemble these with the new O-rings. I believe those O-rings that I've got out are absolutely tip-top. Just make sure they're clean. Oakley dokley. And what I do to put an O-ring on, obviously I wouldn't do this if it was in the water system, but because it's going in the fuel system, just a simple, sorry, I think I'm in the wrong spot there, sorry. All I do is smear them in oil. Okay, this is just, I can't remember if it's 2050 or gear oil, doesn't really make any difference. It's a thick oil one way or the other. Smear of oil on my fingers and on the O-ring there, just from the oil can. Smear that everywhere, just so it doesn't split or damage it as you put it over. This is quite large to get it over. And there are a lot of sharp corners and edges. So a little bit of oil there. I mean, it's only going to wash off with the petrol anyway, so it's no biggie. But it's just safer, I believe. I don't want to use my prod and poke tool purely because it's sharp on the end and I don't want to damage the O-ring as it goes in. So ease it on like you're fitting a tyre, little at a time. And there we go, she's on. Okay, now I'm just going to put a smear more oil around the edge, just so I don't nick it, putting it into the float bowl. Little bit of oil on my fingers. And then just clip that back in. Now you should feel the interference of the O-ring as it goes in. If you can't, there's nothing, it's not compressing it enough. But there it goes. Okay, you can just turn it. That's good. That feels a nice positive fit to me. Gonna wipe my hands, clean with a rag, keep it in my pocket so I know it's clean. I'm happy with the float bowls. I blew everything out with the airline just to make sure everything was absolutely clean in there. There are some quite large divots in there that somebody scraped in. So I am going to err to the side of caution. Just going to raise you up a bit, sorry. I am going to err to the side of caution, put a tiny smear of sealer on there. So sealant wise, I'm just going to put a tiny smear on the tip of my finger. It's just literally going to be an absolute smear around. I do not want a big bead around here. It's more of a safety measure than anything. It's just going around the edge of the outside. I ain't a butcher. Literally, I've got like 3 friends in the entire world, and I always get a message just as I'm doing a video, and you hear it go on my phone. I assume you hear it. So I'm just smearing that round. Right, so I've siliconed one side. You can see I've got silicone sealer on the float there, which I'm just going to clean off. These are actually handed, these gaskets. There's a little tab that goes over it acts like a baffle for the overflow. It was literally a smear of sealer, because I know people are going to be out there going, yeah, cowboy. It was literally more for my peace of mind than anything. You know, I wiped it on and wiped it back off again just to sort of show it the sealer. I'm just wiping the excess off here where I touched it when I put the floats on, put the gasket on. If somebody hadn't dug at the carbs clearly before, I wouldn't have even put that on, but I have, and that's that. So, you know, get over it. If it leaks, take it off, do it again. I'm going to do the same now on the bottom of the float bowl, and I'm going to screw that on. Okie dokie. So I put a tiny weenie smear of gasket seal around there. And what I'm going to do, this is what I do anyway, is just wipe it off the inside like that. when you do gasket sealer on anything, it doesn't really matter if it squelches out the outside. I mean, aesthetically, it looks appalling, don't get me wrong, but functionality-wise, it won't ever really hurt anything. And here's a little tip for you. If you ever get too much sticking out the sides, wait till it dries and then just rub it and it falls off. On the inside, however, so if you're doing things like rocker box covers, you know, valve covers, stuff like that, which obviously I use this stuff on a lot of cars. If it breaks off, if you get a big blob of it and it breaks off, or on a sump gasket, then it's going to go into your oil system eventually. Somewhere along the line, it's going to end up blocking an essential part of your oil system. So obviously this technique I use, and in my experience it's worked, is just to wipe off the edge there, so that if that compresses, then when I put it on, it isn't going to squish it all out inside. As you can see, there's just a little, I just take the edge off. As I say, this is just more for my peace of mind, really. So next, get the screws. Okay, I'm going to do the opposite screws, so that one and that one first. So I'll do that short one first. Blob a copper slip, not because I need to, but purely because I feel I have to put copper slip on everything, like that. Line it up with the hole in the carburetor. Hoping you can see this. Yeah, you can. Yeah. Okay, line it up with the carb hole, square it on and put it down. Start the screw. Now, the keen-eyed amongst you will have noticed I've forgotten the washer on that. I've knocked it off. That doesn't matter because I'm just using it for position at the moment. So what I can do with that afterwards is reposition that, take that one back out once I've got some of the other screws in. So that's just to stop it slip sliding and moving that little bit of sealer I put on there around. So put the screw opposite in. Copper slip squishing out, and then proceed to put the other screws in. Right, so yep, that's them both reassembled. Obviously, as I say, I'm not fully rebuilding these carbs. I haven't changed the diaphragms. And quite honestly, this is a customer's car. He's paying me to do the work. He isn't going to pay me to strip these down and show you the diaphragms and change them for the sake of it. They don't need doing anyway. There's nothing wrong with them. I haven't adjusted the jets. I haven't adjusted the mechanisms. So hopefully, it worked all before. Well, I say hopefully, it will all work again. It worked before, it'll work again. So I'm going to set these back up on the car. I've just got a new fuel filter that I want to blob on it because the old one looked a bit near. So I'm just going to bob the new fuel filter on it, and then I'll test these and show you me testing. So I've sat the carbs back in place there. All I've done is wipe the underside of the carbs, make sure there's no muck or dirt on them, and wipe the O-ring that's in the intake manifold. Made sure it was all dry in there because there was that little bit of residual fuel. Although whether that's come from here or not, I don't actually know. It might have been oil after all. Maybe it's just been run on the choke a little bit and that's what's happened to it. So obviously I haven't disturbed the fuel pipes here. You can see there I've fitted a new fuel filter. That's actually a diesel filter. The only reason I started buying those was because they're very close to the original shape and style of filter that comes on a Stag. They're a tiny, tiny little bit bigger, which obviously can't hurt. And they're also a lot finer, so they stop any real muck going through. So the carbs sat on there. I'll just get the keys. So what I'm going to do is the same thing I did last time, which was turn it on and listen to the fuel pump. Obviously, you're going to struggle to hear the fuel pump like I will. However, it will initially chug quite a lot because obviously the float bowls are empty now. I've emptied all the fuel out of them, so they have to refill. and the fuel filter and the fuel line where I've drained it. So it will obviously run for longer than it would normally on a start. However, I don't want to start the engine. I just want to get a flow of fuel through it. So I'm going to take my microphone off so you can hear. I can hear the fuel pump there. She's chug, chug, chugging. Okay. I'm going to go have a look at the front. Just check some fuel is coming through to the filter. It is. Okay, but it hasn't quite filled it up yet. They do take quite a lot of filling, actually, these float balls. I haven't tested this. This is, you know, first hit. So if it leaks, it leaks. That's you're hearing it as I hear it. And there you go. Oh. That's pretty normal operation as far as I'm concerned. Sometimes the pumps will just click, but that's stopping and then going click, click, click. So what I need to do now, and this is obviously going to be difficult to look at, is to see if any fuel is leaking out of those carbs. So I'm going to have a look around the bottom there. That all looks dry. The overflows obviously aren't connected, so I can see if any fuel's leaking there. Can't see anything leaking. I can still hear the fuel pump just clicking. Obviously, I've got my radio turned off. I'd normally have the radio on. I have to turn it off for copyright reasons. Both of those drains are now dry. Not seeing any fuel coming through. The real rule of thumb now, if I can just rest the torch somewhere where it doesn't scratch, around the top of the radiator, is to lift the carburetors up and just have a look underneath and make sure no fuel is running into the engine, which it is not. So that's fine as far as I'm concerned. So obviously I've speeded that a little bit up. I've now put the nut here back on. You'll notice I undid it again. The carbs can pivot. You can pivot that way on the stud in the middle. There's actually a roll pin comes out the manifold and fits into a divot in there. But it's not what you class as a tight fit. It's not, it's not like a head dowel. It's just sort of it gives you a vague direction. So once I tightened them down, I wasn't actually happy with that. So I took them back off again. Well, I loosened them and just turned them ever so slightly. It doesn't make any difference. Next thing I'm going to do are the cables. Now, if you look at the accelerator cables and the like, this is actually a choke cable, obviously. Sorry, that's the throttle cable. These are the choke cables. The choke cables come out of the bulkhead together here. They operate together, the tandem cables. Now, that one's not too bad, although it's got a bit wiggly wobbly on the end. This one here is a little frayed, and I'll show you how to fix that when I do it. But what I'll do is I'll connect the other cables up first. These are all right, so they'll go as they are again. That's no problem at all. So I'll connect those up and then I'll come back to those. So that's the so the throttle cable's on. You probably saw me, I was just adjusting a tiny bit of slack into it just to make sure there's a tiny bit in there. you'll see the mechanism moves a little bit before the throttles move. Only a tiny bit, you don't need a huge amount of play in there, just a little. And then I've fitted the kick down cable here. 7/16 nut on the back. And then this is the pin at the top. All that was adjusted when I fitted the auto box. If it was all right then, it's all right now. I haven't adjusted anything to do with the gearbox, which would have necessitated me altering that. So that's that on. The breathers are on. When you do things like this, you need to make sure, or I need to make sure, that this pipe here doesn't interfere with this mechanism here. As you can see on a Stag, everything is very tight. So as that goes up, that, it all sort of crashes into it if you're not careful. So things, even like the vacuum advance pipe, I have to loop that out of the way. It's just worth, as you fit anything, just check the operation. Now, the choke cables are a little bit different. So when I fit this choke cable here, the short cable goes obviously to this carb. Inevitably, it goes to the nearest carb. And it goes through the bracket, as you can see here, that then bolts to the air cleaner assembly. Right, so there's probably a bit of editing here to try and get this so you can actually see what I'm doing. But I did promise that I'd show you what I do if the cables are frayed. And this cable, oops, this cable is frayed, okay? So this nearest cable, the small cable here, is frayed at the end, and it's difficult to get through the fitting here. So this one here, I'm hoping you can see that. So what I do with those is simply grab the cable. You can see I've already done this a little. So I grab the cable and I just gently grab it with some pliers and twist it. Now, just twist it in the direction. You'll see that the cable is already twisted. And just grab that so it gets all the little bits in. Now, if the cable is about 2 inches too long, sometimes you just get away with snipping the end off, the last sort of quarter of an inch or so. This one isn't very long, so I dare do that. So then what I'm going to do is just thread a tiny weeny little bit. And it is a bit difficult just to get that over, of heat shrink over the end, just to trap those fraying wires. Now, I don't want a huge amount over there, but that'll do quite nicely. I'm going to heat shrink that on, and all that will do, it's not a mechanical fix. Hoping I'm holding this way you can see it. It's not a mechanical fix, but it is enough to just hold the wires together of that cable. So as I can then feed it back through the stanchion, and then that will, the solderless nipple there will then grip it enough. So just to talk you through it there, I've got all the cables hooked up, throttle, kick down, obviously. This is the choke cable here on the near side carburetor. This is on the off side. Now, obviously this bracket doesn't work until the air filter box is back on. But what I'm going to do is just a quick test. It's awkward because you have to twist the key and reach out and pull this cable, because obviously as I pull the choke cable in, it will do that. And that obviously doesn't select the choke on this side, and although it may start, it probably won't. All these are still disconnected. Obviously these pipes are a little bit split, so I'm going to change those. I have had the fuel pump on since. I'm not seeing any fuel leaking at all, so that's all good. The fuel pump is doing the correct thing, which is click, click, click every now and again. Everything is dry. The overflows aren't leaking at all. Silicon's gone off. Okay, so what I'm going to do is a very, very quick test start. She may run a little bit lumpy because obviously I've been faffing with the fuel and stuff, but I'll just do a quick start and we'll see if it's running okay. So keys are obviously in the ignition for when I checked the fuel earlier. Pull the choke fully on. I will need the choke fully on. It is -1 outside, so we're in park. Right, the main problem there is obviously the choke. Just as a big spiel, don't know why my phone cut out halfway through testing the running and everything. But yeah, so there's no leaks. I've been round. I don't know if you'll see that in that video. I may edit this in or out, but it's all dry under there. There's just a sheen of oil. So I take that as a win. Obviously, if the float valves had been leaking, those little brass valves, all you do is buy some new ones, unscrew the old ones and screw them in. Will that fix it? Well, it should if you do everything right, but this modern fuel does seem to really faff about with stuff, and I don't know why. I've seen them over the years done. You put it back together and, you know, it runs perfectly, and then 2 days later it's all leaking again, and you do it again and again and again, and you just can't beat it. You put a Weber on and boom, it's just stopped. Whether it's the carbs that are worn out, whether it is or not, I think, to be honest with you, I'm quite grateful that this one's been lucky for me and the owner. But anyway, that's just a simple put it back together now. So there you go. Car's all finished. All dry, not leaking, no fuel escaping. All put back together lovely. Tiny bit of a problem with the choke cable on this side, which I showed you earlier on, which is all bent out of shape. All I did was put a little heat shrink around it and straighten it out again and took that off. These are overflow pipes, so I just put a little heat shrink over those, and the same here where they just perished a little. They weren't leaking, but it's just really for structural integrity rather than sealing. These don't really need to seal anyway. They're only vent tubes, same as these are overflow tubes and vent tubes for the float bowls. But yeah, so starts, runs, drives, no leaks, all back to normal how it should be. I'd like to say, excuse the sunny morning in Retford, I'd like to say that this is quite a fortunate event on this one, thankfully, that this all worked. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Luckily on this one, touching wood, everything's sealed okay. So everything's good to go. So I hope that's of some use to you. I'll draw your attention here. This is, I'm just going off at a tangent, but I'll draw your attention to the little robin there. I don't know if you can see out on the stand there. This is my little friend who I feed. Sometimes he gets very close to feeding out my hand, but just won't quite. Anywho, I may or may not leave that in the video, but yeah, so sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. On this one, it's worked, so it's been very fortunate. I think it was just the O-rings, quite honestly. The gaskets were damaged, but I don't think they were leaking. But either way, that's how you do the float bowls. Seal the float bowls back up on a Triumph Stag. I haven't done the diaphragms. Diaphragms are very easy. I haven't had to reset the idle and stuff like that. I've only had to faff about a bit with the choke. The important thing to remember with the choke cables is to make sure you get full scale deflection on both carbs at the same time. So when you pull the cable out and lock it off, both carbs are wide open on the choke and you'll feel them come to a dead stop. And then when you turn them off, they should both go right back to fully closed with a tiny bit of slack in the cable. If they don't go right off, it'll run rich and it'll run badly. You can adjust that by just undoing the clip and letting the outer slide down a little bit. That's how I do it anyway. But just make sure that allows enough travel, because obviously you're shortening the travel that's left on the cable. So make sure that allows enough travel then on the cable to allow full scale deflection on the choke. This has the choke that was the cable that's a bit wiggly wobbly. I cut the end off that. So once it was in and tight, and I've snipped the end off just because it was binding up with the throttle mechanism a bit. And what it needs now is when you pull the choke on, it's fine. When you put the choke off, it's still a little bit faster, and you just give it a tiny dab on the throttle and it just releases everything and it goes click, which is perfectly acceptable and you can live with that. If you've ever had a Ford with a twin choke carb, you have to do that anyway to turn the choke off. So I'm happy with that. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. Hopefully it's of some use. If you ever want to do the job, or if you ever want me to do the job. I hope you've liked it and you click like. If you haven't liked it, don't. If there's anything you can add, feel free to comment, or if there's anything you'd like to ask, feel free to comment. I do try to reply to comments, but I do struggle a little. And if you like what I do, then please consider subscribing. It helps me out a great deal. My videos are taking off a little bit, and that's quite nice. You find that you want to continue doing it in that case. So enjoy, keep classicing, enjoy the weather when it gets good. It's not good at the minute. And later on, I'll be back to the Fiat X19, which has just failed the MOT, unfortunately. So have a great Classic. Cheers. Bye-bye.